Hi, this is Progressive News with Martin Drummond, and I'm just experimenting with my live streaming. But I will do a quick piece here.
Focus is. So it happened. It took place. And it led to a real mask lifting moment, I would say, where Turkey used as its ground force, as it did in Afrin, repurposed Syrian rebels who were once known in Washington as moderate rebels, who were once toasted.
Okay. So, to be clear, there are moderate rebels in Syria. So he acts like just because they have people in there who are radical, that doesn't change the umbrella organization. And unlike most propagandized Americans, I know that most of the Syrian people are not like crazy. Most of them are just typical people.
As freedom fighters, and they were known as...
And they most certainly are freedom fighters. I mean, about 90% of the country is Sunni, and it hates Assad. Assad is a dictator, out and out, flat out dictator. There's no comparing him with Venezuela, which is what Max is going to do. When he compares the Syrian government, which operates out here in Turkey, because it's unsafe to be in Syria, they just get annihilated. I mean, Assad bombs and the Russians bomb Syria at will. So there's no place that a Syrian government could survive inside any of this area. I mean, they wouldn't bomb in Turkey, because then they'd see what really would happen. Turks would retaliate.
The Turkish National Army. So what I did in this...
It's the Syrian National Army, Max. Can't you... I mean, I know you had to have thought, oh wait, it's the Syrian National Army, but he's not going to go back right now and change it.
This piece is just bring to light a report by a Turkish think tank called SETA, S-E-T-A, which has an office in Washington and has offices around the world, but is basically a pro-government Turkish think tank, outlining...
Is there something wrong with being pro-Turkish? I mean, they're the only outside country that's got the balls to do anything about what's happening in Syria. I mean, I know that Jordan would, but they're trying to stay out of it. Lebanon, I'm sure they support the Sunni Syrians. I mean, they've been their neighbors for thousands of years.
The composition of the Turkish so-called National Army, which is really a mercenary army.
It's not called the Turkish National Army. I'm sure I can find plenty of examples in here where see, it's the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army. So, I maybe I wasn't paying attention before, but Max, I thought he knew his shit, but he can't even get the names of the people taking part right.
And it noted that 21 of the 28 militias involved in United under.
And yeah, there's lots of militias, but when Turkey arms and trains Syrians, it makes sure that they understand exactly what they're allowed and not allowed to do. So you've got, here's the where they're fighting, right? Syrian National Army forces seized. Okay, now this area from here to here, the United States and Russia have agreed, and it's not nearly big enough for 4.5 million people, or I'm sorry, about 4 million people, but it's what everybody's agreed to. I mean, and look at it, it's a tiny slice of the top of Syria. This is where you're going to cram in 90% of the population of Syria, because believe me, once there's a safe zone created for Sunni Arabs, which are like, I don't know, maybe 80 or 90%, somewhere in there, of the population of Syria, under a dictatorship here. And you know what? The only reason that they created a safe haven for Baghdadi is because he represents people who think that, everybody should be able to go home and not have to live under a dictatorship that, quite frankly, goes out in the middle of the night and gathers them up and puts them in jails and says, well, it's legal because it's it's a jail and people who are in jail there are terrorists. Hey, it's nonsense, man. Total nonsense. So yeah, that population is going to probably flood into the safe zone, just like I'm sure. You see, they're trying to make Idlib, Syria, this beast Bashar is trying to make this unlivable. I mean, they don't show it today, but there's always 10 or 20 bombings by the beast Bashar and the Russian Air Force. I don't know why there's none on the map today. Maybe because they're concentrating on the, this new area up here. Although I don't see any bombings up here. And maybe it's because the United States has carried out this attack to kill Baghdadi. Which, Baghdadi, he's just a poor Iraqi Sunni who was tortured in a U.S. Detention camp, or whatever you want to call them, and came out radicalized, was fled to Syria, and I guess if he's dead now, he fled to here. So this is where the operation supposedly took place. Well, I'd say for sure it took place, but whether it killed him or not, I mean, I've heard that he was dead like a couple of times, and he always turns out to be alive. It looks like there's what is that? Speculating, but an interesting compound built on the outskirts of Barisha, Idlib last spring. especially the bottom building. So maybe this is a post kind of saying where they think Baghdadi is. So, everybody wants to hate Baghdadi, and I understand that because he claims to have committed a whole bunch of terrorist attacks, right, in the United States, right? So every time some nutjob Sunni goes and does something crazy in the United States, like in Florida, I know there was one, I think in San Diego, and I looked at those, and really all it was no different than an American, somebody who lost their job and was really angry, and they attacked a company picnic, and of course they claim to be terrorists, associated with Islamic State. But it's awfully amazing how they go from being like, I don't know, some kind of worker at a U.S. company blending in perfectly, and then all of a sudden they become an Islamic terrorist, right? When in fact they're actually a disgruntled worker, an American disgruntled worker. And they're very quick to claim that they're IS, and IS is very quick to claim them, because Baghdadi knows what he's doing. He's sitting there going, how can I terrify Americans? Okay, well, I'd say that we've got 1,500 of these guys embedded in your country, snuck into the country, and they're quietly waiting. Well, why do they wait until they're at war with their employer, right? Until they get fired. I mean, if they're such terrorists, wouldn't they wouldn't need that impetus that, lots of Americans go off on a killing spree at some point in their lives when they're just fed up with the system. So I really don't think that you can qualify. I mean, I don't think you can believe Baghdadi when he talks about lone wolf. He doesn't have sleeper cells all around the United States. These people aren't his. They've come to America to become Americans. Now, when they get totally fed up with being Americans, because they experience the same experience as you and me, right? So, shitty jobs, and you know what I'm talking about. And so, maybe because they came from the Middle East, they're like, it's like twice as bad for them, right? So they go off and, kill somebody or whatever. And it's very easy for them to want to make a bigger deal out of what they did, and say that they're IS, right? Islamic State. And it's very easy for Baghdadi, sitting over in Syria where he doesn't have any way of communicating with anybody here in the United States. I mean, he didn't get on a cell phone and talk to this guy and say, yes, Allahu Akbar. No, it didn't happen like that. So, the way that they qualify terrorists, is simply because the guy says he's a terrorist. Well, just because you say you're a terrorist. So, if I were to go off and, do a terrorist attack, and then claim that, I'm a radical with Bernie Sanders. Like there's ever been such a thing, right? But anyway, bear with me here. Simply because I felt like identifying myself with Bernie Sanders or some other political group would somehow add to the attention. It wouldn't make me, even though I am like a Bernie Sanders fan, it wouldn't be like I was a sleeper cell, So all of this stuff, that Max has to say, I hate to say it because, I love Max's coverage of Israel. He's spot on. But when he reaches out, and he's spot on with Venezuela and Nicaragua, I vet all the stuff I look at, and I vet him. And of course, then I found out he was doing all this stuff about Syria, and he's kind of making this his thing, and which it'll be his downfall. I mean, I doubt seriously that he'll write a book about this, because he's probably not stupid enough to go all in, literally, like literature, writing about it.
The banner of the Turkish flag and the Turkish National Army to serve as Turkish ground forces in this invasion, and to strike the Kurds.
Yeah, he's got nearly 4 million people in his country that have fled Syria, and yeah, he's formed. They've formed a Syrian government in exile, which is representative of the people of Syria. Bashar al-Assad isn't representative of the people at all. If you had free elections today, he'd lose in a landslide to just about anybody, And the Kurds, it's amazing how, I guess everybody in Turkey hates them, right? And they just so quickly just flipped over to Assad from the United States. I think that some of them are probably for the United States down here. But it's very easy for them to switch over to a dictator, right? But watch how...
Words with an iron fist in their words. 21 of them had been previously supported by the Pentagon and the CIA. I think 18 supported by the CIA, 3 by the Pentagon. 14 of those factions received TOW missiles made by Raytheon, which are heavy weapons, anti-tank.
They're fighting an enemy that has lots of tanks. What do you expect? Max is taking war figures, so people dying in... I mean, when you look at these, there's Kurds, and by the way, these Kurds all refuse to leave this area. I mean, you don't see clashes out here. The clashes are taking place inside the safe zone. So they've been given, a month now to leave the safe zone, and everybody's claimed that they're leaving. The Russians have claimed they're leaving, or they've left, and the Syrians claim they're not really Syrians. The Alawites, Beast Bashar, claimed that they've left the... Okay, well, if they've left, then why is it see if I can... Why is it that there's violent clashes between Turkish-backed forces? This is the Syrian National Army that he's talking about, that he keeps calling the Turkish National Army, and pro-Assad forces and SDF. So, these militias that Assad is throwing out there are joining up with SDF forces. I mean, these aren't civilians. When it says SDF, they're... And by the way, he talks about... Max talks about... So wait a minute. So obviously there's lots of SDF and Kurdish militias still in the safe zone, and so they get killed by Syrian National Army or Turkish army with them, and Max is going to say that it's a massacre, and you fight, you're in a war with these people, and they're shooting at you, and they kill your friend right next to you, and you capture some of them because you weren't able to kill them all, and emotions are running very high, and they just kill them. After being disarmed and everything, and they just shoot him on the side of the road. Well, I'm not going to criticize Syrian National Army members for revenge killings against captives. I mean, yeah, I think it's wrong, and I don't think they should do it. But I'll refer you back to a little bit of American propaganda, Saving Private Ryan. If you know that film, then he talked his commander and his troops into letting this German guy go, and then he proceeded to see the German guy on the other side killing his own men and everything, and the next time he had the chance, he just shot him in cold blood, after they'd captured him. So, I don't really agree with it. Tie him up and make him a war prisoner or something, but at the same time, it's going to go on in a war, and for fucking Max to act like that's a slaughter, I think slaughter. So he's portraying it as a massacre. So he's acting like, he leaves this like this, slaughter Kurds. Well, it's not Kurds. They're Kurdish, but it's in a war, and they're fighters. And the Kurds have done something that I wish the Sunni would do, and the Sunni won't do it because they have a tradition of oppressing women, so women can't fight in the war, that's for sure, right? They're very passive. Their children are very passive. That doesn't work in a war. The Sunni, and you know what? I'm sure Muhammad and Sunni religion really would not say that women, I was about to say women and children, but women can't fight, because I'm sure that there's a tradition when a war demands it, when women could be fighters. Matter of fact, I know that there's a tradition of Arab women fighting in wars when it was desperate. So, you Sunnis, you need to stop being so passive aggressive. It's like you're aggressive a little bit, but then you're passive when you need to fight. And they do need to fight. If I were in the camps in Turkey where all the refugees are, I'd be telling every woman in there, get off your ass and grab a machine gun, learn how to use a tow missile, whatever. And I'd have an army 4.5 million strong, and gathered together with the other 15 or so million Sunnis across Syria, and just take back Syria. That's how easy it would be. But they don't seem to be able to get their shit together. This could all be over in a minute if they'd all get their shit together and fight. But I guess they somehow think that somebody's going to do it for them all the time. Anyway, so
Max missiles, and They were basically the Free Syrian Army, which had been supported by the CIA. Not only that, but Salim Idris.
Salim, Free Syrian Army has always been a tiny little entity. You know, the again the Sunnis are totally disorganized. They're in all the, like he said, 18, 20, 25 different militias who often end up fighting each other and can't agree on anything, and are all desperate because they're under the attack from the United States and Russia and the Bashir Assad army. I'm not going to call them Syrian because they're not Syrians. They're traitors to the country. You know, they're dictators, thugs. But, you know, so it makes them a very ineffective force. They lack coordination and they lack the ability to even defend their own territory. You know, I mean, they're down to this little tiny area in the north of the country, and they've depended on the Turks, who are all these little blue dots, to defend them. And look what happens. This was all part of Idlib, and now the Turks are in a little tiny observation point there. Man, surrounded by Syrian forces. See, this is the old line. These are all and this is all part of the Sochi agreement, you know, where they've agreed to and what a joke that was, right? And you can see when you look at that why Turkey acts on its own, you know, because they know that these agreements that have been made are just going to be broken by the beast Bashar. So let's see Max not only make factual errors but actually lie to support his theories, his conspiracy theories.
Who is the sort of so-called defense minister of the Syrian Provisional Government, which is as real as Juan Guaido's government.
Yeah. So you've got 20 million Syrians, which are Sunni, who would all support him and whoever this guy is, but they would support the government in exile over the few million that are minorities here and might support the beast Bashar. And you're going to compare that to Guido. You know, Guido's a narco-terrorist thug who only the United States and a few countries will back, because he was not elected. He didn't even participate in the election. I mean, that's just so weak. You know, it makes me wonder why I ever even backed you when you were right, because you're so capable of just turning into this propaganda machine. And you know, ever since you took on Aaron Mate, and why do you guys want to concentrate on this? You've got so many other, well, because it's news, so you think that people will watch it because it's more current. Well, not if you're wrong about everything you're saying.
In Venezuela, this is the figure who was initially appointed to lead the Free Syrian Army and who welcomed John McCain in 2013 when he made his notorious surprise visit to Syria, hoping to stir up a US military intervention. And so the mask is lifted. Why? Because these Turkish mercenaries carried out heinous executions of Kurdish captives. They dragged a Kurdish female legislator from her car and executed her on the roadside.
Who is a Kurdish legislator? I mean, this is happening in Syria, so she's not a Kurd in the Turkish parliament or anything like that. You know, do we know who she really is? Because I think I've seen her face when they showed Kurdish fighters. So, you know, he's taking all this stuff that's related to people who hate each other, and, you know, when they finally get a chance to kill each other, they do. Alright? I mean, I'm sure Americans in the same situation would be doing the same thing. You know, you finally get a chance to kill this, what you consider to be a terrorist who's, and by the way, the Kurds are the most successful terrorists in the world, from what I'm able to see. I mean, probably about 20 or 30,000 people they've killed. So, you know, go ahead, Max, run out and find every kind of picture of a pretty face you can find that you can make people feel sorry for, and don't bother to mention that they're terrorists, you know, that they've committed terrorist acts of murder against innocent people. You know, portray them any way you want.
Executing 2 Kurdish captives who were not even fighters. And
were they or weren't they? Just because you say so? So, you know, if you would film yourself killing somebody, doesn't that mean that you think you have a fairly good reasons for killing that person? I mean, you want your own people to see that you killed them, right? So obviously your people will be applauding this, right? Now, we're all horrified by this, right? All of this. But where is the video of Kurds killing people? Kurds have killed lots of people in Syria. They've rounded up the Sunni and put them all in camps where thousands have died. And there's no media. There's no media. I don't see European outlets. I don't see American outlets. You know, every day throughout this area, there have been tens of thousands of Sunni rounded up and put in camps. That's Bahara IDP camp. That's a prison camp. That's a concentration camp. Thousands of people in there in tents, to the point where the women and children in the camp burned all the tents in a hope to create enough smoke so that they could escape. Right? I mean, there's nobody talking about this. The only reason we know about it is that there's some kind of evidence of what's going on here. Al-Hawl IDP camp. And how many camps are there that we don't know about? There's probably small camps. Ain Isa IDP camp. These are all concentration camps. I mean, what do you think that the Kurds are going to put Sunnis into, you know, luxury apartments? And who knows how many die? And, you know, they didn't even have this on the map before, but there's another IDP camp. and who knows how many smaller jails and prisons, and tons of women and children rounded up. So Max, uh, you're just useless anymore. If all you want to talk about is Syria, then you're just useless. There's tons of Palestinians suffering under Israeli occupation. Go talk about them. The United States is still trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government in a multitude of ways. Uh, uh, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua are still under threat. Go talk about that. Don't waste your time trying to make people believe that the Sunnis are all terrorists, all 20 million of them, all these, I heard you the other day talk about how, people like me are trying to portray them as farmers. Well, yeah, Max, they were. In 2011, they were just farmers. They didn't mix with the Iraqi militants who'd come out of Iraq. They were just people living in villages all across Syria. The vast majority of them. I mean, I can show you. Maybe it's in here in the top, actually. Okay, so pre-war, pre-Civil War. Okay, I can't make sense of this, but because they're talking, it's supposed to be demographics of Syria, but they're talking more about the war. But I can tell you that see, this mixes everything up. It mixes up pre-Civil War and Civil War and everything. But out of like 25 million Syrians, like 20 million of them are Sunni. So you've got where they lived all through the country at one time. Now you've got a bunch forced into here, into Idlib, and then the rest are either in Turkey or Lebanon, Jordan, or maybe even fled to Iraq. And there's a lot stuck because they decided to risk, staying there, even though the beast Bashar is rounding them up and putting them in jails and then executing them. Every Wednesday they tell them they're moving them to a different part of the prison, and then they find themselves in a room full of places to hang people, and they mass hang them. And I'm sure it hasn't stopped. And I have something from one of the human rights organizations that somehow have contacts with people in the jails who aren't happy about what's going on, obviously. So yeah, Max, you're full of shit anymore. That's the face of a liar. You're a lying piece of shit. You're a hero when you cover Israel, South America, and you're taking that status and and using it to promote propaganda. Yeah. So, this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News, and this ends on my piece on what Max is doing these days. But I'm gonna mess around with my feed and see if I can figure out exactly how to get it to work right. Because from what I see here, it's just going to produce a video that's not the right size.